How did you get that first job? Just curious.
And this is a bit weird, and I can't decide if I like this. But before we get too coggy, let's make sure it
Let's
works.
see.
But it's like you just think different, right? You have to think about like what's happening every frame, physics. Was just kind of a love for games and wanting to know how they're made, and then being like, oh wow, you can actually make them, and then being like, wow, you can make like whole kind of worlds. And I was focused on 3D character animation. I got about 3 years into it. It's gonna sound funny, but I was like,
Hey, I'm Kiley. Welcome to the channel. This is a new series where I'm going to sit down with developers of all different kinds, and we're going to go through some programming problems, some challenges, actually working on some projects that they're working on, and you'll get a sense of how they got to where they are, how they write code. Maybe we'll even encounter some bugs and some problems, and we'll troubleshoot them along the way. And you'll get to hear a couple of developers discussing things in real time, as we really would if we're really working on a project. I know I would have wanted to watch content like this when I was just getting started in development, so I hope this is valuable to you. Today, we're going to be joined by Duncan, one of my former colleagues, and he's going to be working in Godot, which is a game development engine, writing GD script as he's working on a 2D game that he's been developing. So you're going to get a ability to see Duncan program in GD script in Godot, and we're going to see his 2D space game as it comes to life, and we build an energy bar. But along the way, we're going to talk about Duncan's career and kind of how he got from web development into game development and what he's doing now. And we're also going to kind of take a look around what it's like to program in the Godot game engine. And you'll get a chance to see him write some code in GD script. And we're even going to kind of run into a bug or two. So if that sounds interesting to you, sit back, relax, and enjoy this conversation I had with Duncan Iaria. All right. Hey, welcome to the series. I first met years ago in a web development consulting firm in Atlanta, Georgia. And we worked together for several years and then stayed friends. And Duncan has an interesting background that includes an MFA. It includes 3D design. It includes, writing games, building games on the side while also doing web development for a full-time job. So Duncan, why don't you say hello and tell everybody just a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. Yeah, hello. Again, I'm Duncan from Wildforge Interactive now, a company that I've founded to do UI and contract work, as well as, hopefully some games as well. So yeah, where I started was, well, I guess you mentioned sort of my education as well, which was interesting. I actually went to art school. I did a BFA in animation, and I was focused on 3D character animation. I got about 3 years into it and kind of realized that it's going to sound funny, but I was like, I don't know if I can sit and like stare at the computer for 8 hours a day and have this be my like full-time career. And the thing about it was it's kind of, I mean, I do that now, right? Anyway, I still sit there, but
yeah,
it was a very sort of like very focused. A lot of your time was in a graph editor. And so you're just kind of like fine tuning all these points on a graph. And I mean, it was fun, but it kind of got, at the high levels, it got pretty tedious. And I just felt a little kind of like, I just couldn't do that for the rest of my life. So I ended up going back to school for interactive design and development. And I was kind of focused on game development. And then I ended up sort of getting a job in web development as my first job for a government contractor. I did that for a few years, and it was an interesting job. It did not pay very well, but I learned a lot about the web dev stuff. And then I ended up, while I was there, we did also like simulation type work, and actually did some mobile games with Unity as well.
That's pretty cool. So yeah. I assume you worked for ARPANET, like you built the original internet government contractor.
Yeah, original internet, yeah, of course.
How did you get
the pipes in Virginia?
Yeah, you're literally physically building the internet, web development. So did you, how did you get that first job? Just curious, like, was it through a contact or?
Yeah, it was actually through a friend of mine that I had went to college with. And I mean, we could do a whole segment, a whole thing about my thoughts maybe on the educational stuff, but I would say that the most beneficial thing I've got from college was just that network of people. And so he basically contacted me and he said, hey, we're looking for sort of a generalist developer. We do web and Unity stuff. And I said, sure. And I actually did a little like portfolio project just to kind of show something in Unity, and they liked it. And so that's how I got my first gig.
Yeah, that's very cool. I think we met not too long after that. So then what'd you do after the government job?
So I actually, I ended up moving back to Atlanta, or to Atlanta for the first time for my wife's work. And so I worked remotely, and this was before, obviously, the pandemic. So it was a little bit more of a rarer thing, but I worked remotely for about a year with that company still. And then, I went funny enough, I went to a coding boot camp. And that was really to just, yeah. So that was really just to, like, I was already doing programming at work, but I really wanted to focus on like the web side of it and learn sort of the modern stuff, because also at the time there still is a lot going on in the space, but it was very confusing for someone brand new to know where to start, right? Because it was when Angular and React were kind of fighting, and then I think Vue had just sort of started, and so it was kind of like I just needed a direction, and so I ended up going to a Georgia Tech's coding boot camp, and it was also really nice because it was like 3 times a week, and it was for kind of like older people. meaning just the people that had full-time jobs or had a family or couldn't go in those immersive, like a lot of them are 7 days a week for like 3 months or something. And
you kept your job while you did that,
right?
3 nights a week.
Right. So I did that, and it was also, I think the class started at 7 and went to like 9 p.m. So it was awesome, and it just kind of gave me that direction that I needed, and so then through that they had like a career placement thing, and I ended up getting into contact with Soltech, which is where I met you. And then basically they were like, hey, we'll give you this much money, and I was like, wow, that's a lot more money.
Yes, I will take that. What do I have to do? Write some JavaScript.
Yeah, and that was interesting in and of itself, because I had never done any professional React, and they were like, oh, we got a project, it's React, you'll be the only front-end engineer, and it's also there's going to be a React native mobile component. And to be frank, I was like, that's a lot of new stuff all at once, and being the only one on the project, I was kind of had a bit of like a panic moment before I actually started, but I figured it out.
I remember we were there.
Yeah,
and I didn't know you.
Panic.
There was CSS. There were a few panics that I remember, but one was this was panic for me actually. We didn't know each other that well, but I also was kind of new to React at the time, and one of the senior engineers who was helping you, Niall, we were talking. You guys were talking about Redux, and something came up about how Redux works, and Niall was like, Kiley, come over here. So can you explain to Duncan how something Redux works? And I was like, oh my gosh, I think I can, but like, I was literally, I wish I could go back and hear that answer, because it was probably so wrong. But
well, I was
just
so
like, whatever,
underwater at that point too, that I trust me, that was fine. I'm sure I was just like, wow,
you were just like, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Well, my panic moment was, if you recall, it was like kind of later. I don't even know why we were there so late, but it was like you were like the last person in the office or something. Probably after the Redux thing, and I was like, oh, that guy's really smart. And I was just having like, I had done all this Redux stuff, all this like complicated stuff where like the Redux was shared between 2 packages and got minified. Like I set all this cool stuff up, and then I was like having this CSS issue, and I was like, I just felt so shameful, because I was like, man, CSS should be like the easiest part of this whole thing, but I just can't figure this out. So finally I broke down, and I was like, Kiley, how do we get this like screen overlay thing to work and not totally break everything? And I remember you were basically like, well, let's just find a website that does it and copy it CSS. And I was like, yeah, that's a really good idea. So yeah.
I don't remember that at all, but did we get it working? Okay, all right.
It wasn't even hard. It was like one of those, I think when you've stared at a problem too long and you just kind
Yeah.
of need a reset. You know, it was
Yeah.
like I was at that point, like probably 2 hours before that. And so really, I should have just asked you way before, but I was like, dude, this guy's gonna know I'm a fake, I'm a fraud.
Right.
If I ask him a CSS question.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that's a good point to make, which I think I've learned now after having done this for over a decade at this point. It's like I will ask a question, no matter how dumb or simple it is, within minutes of running into the problem, I will
Yeah.
send somebody a message. Like, I don't care
Yeah.
anymore. And I think when I was brand new to this, I was very worried that my question was stupid. It was going to, waste some senior engineer's time to answer it. But like, no, now I'll just ask the question right away.
Well, there's kind of a fine line, and again, this could probably be its own whole session, but it's kind of hard, right? There's questions that you should just Google, right?
Yeah.
There's questions that are specific to the project, and those ones are always. I feel like you should probably try for a few minutes, and if you can't figure it out, just ask someone, right?
Yeah.
Especially somebody that is familiar with the project you're working in, because they're just gonna know, right? Most likely, they'll just point you at least to the person who knows, right? And
Yeah.
you just save a lot of time. And I said there was 3, but those were the only 2.
But actually, yeah. Well, these days they have a whole new friend you can ask, which is ChatGPT.
Chad.
Yeah,
GPT.
Chad GPT. Yeah.
Ask him first. He knows a lot.
Definitely worth asking right away. Okay, so thanks for that.
Sure.
Let's see real fast. Like after Soltech, after that consulting gig, catch me up to what happened between then and ultimately now you're building a game. So let's take me there.
We'll just fast forward it. Don't want to get too caught in the weeds, but yeah. So basically, then I got another job with a company called Backed, which was kind of more of a crypto focused company. And there I was working as a senior mobile engineer, only really writing React Native. And so I was there about 3 years again. Got laid off in December, actually. And then decided to sort of strike out on my own, start my own just kind of company, really. And right now, so what I do is I do contract work, freelance contract work. I would say about half time, and then try to save some time to work on games, because that's kind of what really got me into the whole technology stuff and development in the first place. Was just kind of, I mean, I think that's most people's story.
Yeah,
was just kind of a love for games and just like wanting to know how they're made, and then being like, oh wow, you can actually make them, and then being like, wow, you can make like whole kind of worlds. And and so I'm trying to get back into that. I will also say, I have 2 kids. I just had a newborn, so honestly, I'm just kind of getting by, getting the freelance stuff done. But that's kind of the thing I'm aiming for. So
yeah, well, I am really excited to kind of dig into the game that you're building. And I believe today we're going to be looking at Godot, the game engine. But before we do that, I just think that I think a lot of people are probably in their same shoes. There were a lot of tech layoffs lately, and a lot of people are kind of reevaluating if they really want to go get another 40-hour week, 9-to-5 corporate job, or if they want to try something that they've always wanted to try. And so I think it's really cool that you decided to go for this, try it. Do you have any thoughts about how it's going so far and if it was the right choice?
Yeah. So one thing I would say, I guess if I could give like a career advice to people, at different phases, right? I would say it's definitely good in the beginning to get like a job at a product company or even a consulting place, right? Because you'll learn sort of like how it is to work in a team. You'll learn about like tools that people use and just that kind of thing. And then one thing that I always did was, if I was interested in something, I would try to like a technology that I wasn't working on at work. I would kind of see if I could find like a freelance gig to learn it, because that's kind of how I learn best, is basically having something I have to do, right? And so I just bring that up because I was fortunate in that I had some freelance contacts that, when I got laid off, I just kind of reached out and said, hey, do you have anything that you need? And I was able to kind of secure like my first, as soon as I was laid off, I had a kind of a retainer with someone, so that kind of gave me some breathing room, right? Um, and just, keep those relationships good and do good work. And I would say, to answer your actual question, which was how's it going? Yeah, so I have one client that's a retainer that is about, I don't know if we want to get too specific, but I think I do about 30 hours a month. And then I have another client that's a little different, and it's more milestone based work. And so it's going well. I mean, maybe even too well, right? Because you kind of, if you want to keep time to work on your own projects, you'll sometimes find that you have to say no to things.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm kind of in the point, I think if I didn't have these two kids, right, I would be doing great, right? It would be perfect. But
These pesky kids.
These pesky kids, they
These
take up
darn.
a lot of time too.
Yeah, man. Well, maybe another call we can dig more into the independent web developer contractor stuff, because I think a lot of people might be interested in that. But today is about gaming and Godot, and so I'll pull up your screen here. All right, so tell me. So I'm a web developer. I have never built a game or used a game engine even at all. So tell me a little bit about what we're looking at here. Like, what is Godot?
Okay, yeah. So I reopened the project just so people can see what it's like to launch it from scratch, right? So what is Godot? Godot is a free and open source game engine. I think it's probably was open sourced maybe 10 plus years ago, or maybe 2014, somewhere around there. I would say it's probably, of the top 3 engines, it's probably like number 3 in like the one that people know about and popularity. But it definitely seems like it's been growing a lot lately. And so, yeah, it's a game engine. One of the things I like about it is it feels very lightweight, right? Like when I open my project here, it just takes a few moments and it just kind of opens.
And that's compared to like Unity or
Unreal.
Unreal.
Yeah.
Does it take longer to open those?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's like such a minor thing, but the thing that I feel like when I'm using Godot is it feels a lot more lightweight. And what I mean by that is like it's just kind of like almost an editor that glues together your assets and your scripts, which is what Unity and Unreal are. But they feel a lot more like, I don't know, just kind of they have a lot of stuff going on, right? They're always rebuilding shaders and like it's, and all that. So this feels a little bit more lightweight. It's kind of snappy, but it is like a little bit more bare bones at the same time, right? Which, is good and bad, depending on what you're looking for. I found that it's very great for like 2D games, especially like kind of smaller ones. And I would actually recommend, based on if you want to try to make a game based on your goals, if you're looking to do a 2D game, if you're kind of looking to be like a solo, you kind of want to make a game as a hobby or as a really small indie project, I think I would just go with Godot, for sure. If you're trying to do something that's more 3D, maybe a little bit more ambitious, if you're looking to get a job in the job industry, even, I would say Unity might be a better choice there. And then if you're like looking to really do AAA, first person, third person, 3D, bleeding edge graphics, probably working on a big team in the end, that's kind of going to be more your Unreal Engine situation.
Gotcha. So indie, is it fair to say that a lot of indie game developers are probably thinking about Godot?
I think so. Yeah, it's been gaining a lot of popularity.
Cool.
Version 4, Godot 4, just came out in the beginning of this year, and I'm actually using 4.1. It just released as well.
Cutting edge.
I know. Why?
Leading edge.
But that's one thing I'll say, right? I've used Unity. I've used Godot. I've used Unity a lot. That was my primary one previously. Godot is like some features I kind of needed were like I found that they were like literally in the like bleeding edge release candidate that wasn't even officially released, right? And I was like, man, I really need that. And so, you're kind of at the whim of working with release candidate options, and I think Godot 4, they basically was kind of like, I don't want to say it was their MVP, but it was kind of like what can we say is the next step up, and then give us a good foundation, and then let's add to it, right? So like in a way it feels like it was almost kind of, I mean, what was there worked well, but there were definitely some missing features, and the plan is just they're gonna just keep adding onto it. So
Yeah, well, cool. Well, why
yeah.
don't you tell us a little bit what we're looking at here, what your game is at a high level, and then what we're going to be doing today.
Okay, cool. So it is going to be a little bit small here, but I'll kind of mention that. So the working title is called Space Mongrels, right? It's basically just a 2D sort of action shooter game, and it's in the prototyping stage, basically. So I'm hoping to release it at some point, but it's kind of like my forever project, right? I've kind of rebuilt it probably at least 3 times now. It's in a very early stage. It's just kind of prototypey. And I think what I'm going to end up doing with it is making it sort of a scenario where you have a spaceship here and you kind of go out around and you collect salvage that you return to a central place and can sell back to upgrade your ship more and get, better weapons, faster ship, more maneuverable. And then also the kind of end goal is to pay off your debt, right? Because I kind of like the idea of the blue collar space worker.
The
right? So
belters.
the belters, right? So that's kind of the idea. That's probably going to change as I develop it more, but this is kind of what it looks like right now. So really all I've got done is sort of like the movement. There's some basic shooting. But
super cool.
yeah, so the inspiration was kind of like sort of like, I mean, it's obviously not realistic, but it handles a little bit more realistically. Like, there's technically a little bit of gravity, but if you start going in a direction, you're just gonna basically keep going that way.
Very, very, very Newtonian of you.
Oh, well, it's definitely like an approximation, right? But kind of inspired by games like things like No Man's Sky. I haven't played Star Citizen, but like in theory, it sounds really cool, but it's also like a game that sounds so complicated that, like, being a dad, I wouldn't be able to just pick up and play, right?
Yeah.
And so the idea here is to kind of make a 2D game that people can just pick up and play for like 10 minutes, right? And just have some fun, and try to capture that sort of like space exploration and like flying your spaceship sort of vibe. And I'm kind of targeting Steam Deck specifically, which is a handheld, and that's kind of why it's this size, right?
So yeah, and Godot can export your game for almost any platform, right? Like iOS, Mac, Windows, and I guess Steam.
Yes. So for the Steam Deck, it's actually a Linux build. And that's one interesting thing about Godot is it works really well with Linux. I'm running Windows right now, but the developers all, I think, use Linux. So it's probably the engine that's the most stable on Linux. But yeah, the exporting process is like super painless for Linux. But yeah, it can hit. I think Unity is the one that's going to hit the most platforms out of the gate. But Godot can as well. The only kind of caveat I'll bring up to people is for consoles, because the console software to like get it onto like a Switch or a Xbox is proprietary. You can't just do it with Godot. You basically either have to do it yourself, which I honestly would have no idea, or there's companies that will like kind of port them. And I think that's something they're kind of working towards figuring out a solution for. But the reason for it is it's free and open source, so they can't really include those things. But I will say with Unity, if you want to make a console build, I think you have to use their Pro subscription, which is going to run you like around, I think think it's like $3,000 a year.
Wow. Wow.
I think.
That feels very, 2005, when, like, remember when you had to have like a subscription, or not a subscription, just like a license to use like Visual Studio, and like
Yes.
and like you had to have a license to even use. I remember us buying a license to use like an Angular UI library that was like a table grid,
Oh
and
yeah.
those things were hundreds of dollars.
A
You
year.
just, you
Yeah.
don't see that anymore, I guess. But that's interesting. So yeah, so that's why with Godot, if you export for Linux and just, you can just put it on the Steam Deck, and you don't have to buy any kind of licenses really. You can just
Right.
what do you do? Just upload it to Steam?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So, and just I wanted to kind of
Oh yeah.
sanity check myself. So it looks like it's $2,000 a year. So not three. My bad.
Yeah.
But see, publish games to consoles. Um, but it's like one of those things where you're probably gonna have to, for Godot, you're probably gonna have to pay someone to port it,
Yeah.
unless you can do, unless you have like a dev kit of a thing, and I mean those cost money. So it's kind of like one of those things. Like I don't know how much it would cost to do that, but if you're going to go to console, you're probably going to be paying money, and if you're going to console, you're probably making money too, right?
Mm-hmm.
But with Unity, like to do a Steam, like to do a lot of the other targets, it's free, right? Unity is
Mm-hmm.
actually pretty great, and can be free, but it's kind of like one of those things, like if you're trying to do consoles, it's going to cost money. So
Yeah. Well, let's see. We've made people wait
yes,
a long
yes,
time, but it was a good
yes.
conversation. But let's see.
Sure.
Let's see what are we going to add today?
Okay, so right now, the way that what I have going on is, I have a boost system, right? So when I hit shift on my keyboard, you boost a little bit, right? You go a little bit faster. And I also have it working for controller as well. When you hit, I think it's B, right? You boost, right? And right now the way it works is it's based on a complete timer, right? So it's like, I don't know, every 2 seconds you can boost, right? And that's just kind of how it works. So one thing I thought would be interesting to add is to create basically an energy bar, right? An energy system that is what your boosting would depend on, meaning that, and I've actually got the bar already here, but it's not connected to anything.
Cool.
So this blue bar. So the idea is that your blue bar would be constantly ticking up as your ship's reactor is replenishing energy, and then your boost would cost, I don't know, half the bar. We can play with that a little as we get into it. And the idea for that is like, kind of what I envision happening is, maybe different weapons are costing energy to use. Maybe you have a shield system in your ship, right? And when you take damage, it takes damage from energy instead of your health bar, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it just kind of it's one of those can of worms, right? Where it makes the player make some decisions, where it's like, am I going to shoot or am I going to boost, right? Or whatever. So that's kind of the idea. And I think it's a little bit more, there's more stakes to using your booster than just, hey, every 2 seconds I can use it. So
yeah.
So that's what we're going to do. And let's get into it. So this is what the game looks like. We'll still have the boost. We'll just have it connected to this energy bar. And so, kind of like what I mentioned too, is this is definitely in my prototyping stage. So this is the scene here called Playground. And just to give a really quick editor overview for anyone who hasn't seen it, Godot, over here is like your hierarchy of things. So these are everything in this scene here, right? And then down here is just kind of like a file browser. So if you have sort of your assets, your scripts, you can kind of organize them down here and see what's in there. This is obviously the 2D window, and then here's kind of a console down here. And then on the right is sort of your inspector area. And it's actually a very similar layout to Unity. So jumping from Unity to this, I felt pretty comfortable out of the gate, which was cool.
Yeah.
So now to do what we want to do, we have this player, which has a script on it. Okay, so here's all the script stuff. I'll make this a little bit bigger. And again, I will say that this script handles a lot of things. Again, it's kind of that prototype phase. And you can even see where I've kind of done similar things a little bit differently. But this is right now kind of what's handling all of the input, and it's allowing the player to move. And then I started to kind of break things up into more components or nodes is what Godot calls them. If you're coming from Unity, it's like a component. The idea sort of being like React, where things are components, and it's kind of a better idea to compose things together rather than to have a single file that you know, if you want to add something, you add it to that one file and all that. So I've been beginning to break things out into components.
Cool. And this language, right, that we're looking at is GD script?
Yes. So one interesting thing about Godot is you can use GD script as kind of the native scripting language, which is very similar, I'm told, to Python. To be frank, I've never used Python, mostly JavaScript and C# and TypeScript, of course. But what I will say is, like, that was kind of initially one thing I was like, oh, I'm gonna have to learn another language, but it's just very much feels comfortable. Like I don't feel like, I mean, I wouldn't say I know GD script, but I also I was able to just start doing stuff like almost immediately. I didn't really have to like sit down.
You're brilliant. Because you're
certainly not
web developer. I can definitely see the similarities to Python. I mean, look, the indentation, the lack of curly braces delineating between functions, like,
which is very weird to me. But and also, like, I don't think people typically do these semicolons, but you don't need to. But it's just something that, like, I need it.
Yeah,
I have to have it. So sorry.
And I feel like I see some typing here, some types, but are those just classes?
Yeah, so there is, with Godot 4, there's more and more. You can type things, but you can also not type things, right?
Okay.
And supposedly, you know, you get performance boosts if you do type things. I do it to stay sane, and then also for some performance boosts.
Okay, cool, cool.
So what we'll do is actually, what we're going to go ahead and do is, to the player, again, if you're looking at, like, want to see a visual representation. So this is the player, right? And I will say the one weird thing about Godot is, like, it really wants to grab sort of the bottom thing in the hierarchy by default. So, you know, it's just grabbing a bunch of stuff that I don't want it to grab. But this is the player. So it's, if we move it around just for the sake of, like, right, so let's just move it around. So see this is kind of like the player and all the stuff that's connected to it. And so there's a bunch of stuff going on right now. And again, I kind of need to refactor all this. But what we're going to do is we're going to add a new node to it.
Cool.
So right now I've got health, right? And the health node is actually what's driving this health bar right here. And if we just take a look at that, and I bring this up because what we're doing is actually very similar. So, like, see how we've lost health now? It's kind of like similar but opposite. So what we're going to do is we're going to just kind of really mimic this node and then make a few changes. And that's what we're going to do. So to make a new node, and again, in Godot, similar to a lot of other kind of languages, the thing that you want to do is basically have your top level thing that orchestrates all of your lower level components, right? So the lower level component should be able to function basically sort of independently, right? Like,
yeah, like inversion of control, kind of like, or do you mean more like you could use that lower level component in lots of different scenes?
The idea is kind of, the goal is to make it so that it basically can be thrown on any, like, if I made another player, if I made an NPC, right? And I wanted them to also have energy, right? The idea is to kind of be able to just throw that energy node on there, and it would still just, you know, work basically.
Yeah. Cool.
And you might need to do a little bit of work on that top level thing again to sort of wire some things up, but that's kind of the goal, right? So that's the goal. We'll see if we can get there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a node to this player. And I'm actually going to do, there's all sorts of different nodes. One thing that's cool with Godot is you can just start typing and you can see all the different sort of nodes that exist. Another thing that's interesting is like, basically, you use nodes for a lot of different, basically everything. But right now we're just going to use, again, kind of like a base node because we don't really need it to exist in space. We just kind of want to hold some data and update it and then basically notify the systems that need it, right? So we'll call this energy because naming stuff is good. And then what we're going to do is add a script as well, right? And so the script is sort of how you give things interactivity or functionality, right? So we'll have it inherit from just node, we'll call it energy, and we'll hit create. And we'll flip on over to the script window. And one thing that's pretty cool about Godot that they've actually recently changed is it's all kind of one window, right? And it has its own script editor, which you can actually use VS Code if you want, but I've found that this one actually works pretty well. And it does some really cool things too, where you can access the documentation just by shift clicking on stuff. And it's actually really good. You can just, here's the documentation. You can just read about it from clicking on it right there. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's cool. That reminds me of how Microsoft is making VS Code, but also making TypeScript. So they can really, really build in awesome TypeScript support deeply into VS Code. And so like here, they're making the editor, but also the language.
Right.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So again, I just went with GD script. I mean, I know C#, but GD script is kind of like the native thing. And it's like all the documentation is really good for it. And I'm like, it's just very connected to the engine. Right.
Yeah.
And so I was just like, you know what? Because when you're learning something new, you just kind of want to have the most resources you can. And it's like, if all the examples are in GD script, then, I mean, again, the C# stuff is kind of reaching parity, but it's kind of a work in progress. But anyway, so that's what we're doing here. And I'm going to be frank, what I'm going to do is, since this project is something that I work on basically nights right now, what I've kind of opted to do is sort of basically take this health script and sort of almost copy it, but just have a similar structure. Because I've kind of done this for health. So I'm going to kind of reference this as we're working. And then, we'll make some changes, of course, but it'll be sort of like a good guideline. And that's how I find with like, I don't know how you do it, Kiley, but with like these side projects that you don't work on every day necessarily, or, you'll have big breaks. It's always nice to sort of have these things that you've already figured out and you can kind of look back at them and then kind of take those ideas and sort of springboard off of them. So that's kind of what I'm going to do here.
I mean, like you writing code today is basically you leaving yourself little notes for a month from now. And then you got to go back and read your own code and be like, what was I doing here?
Right.
I mean,
But yeah, so this is a good example, right? It's like, well, the health bar already kind of functions sort of like what I need. So let's just take the stuff that already works and then kind of get back in the flow. So the first thing you'll see that I did is I did class name energy extends node. And there is some inheritance in GD script. But in this case, what this is really doing is, and you see once we've done this, if I were to go back to here and add a child node, and now you'll see that energy actually will appear as a node in the editor itself, right?
Gotcha.
So that's pretty cool. So that's kind of what's happening here. It also kind of helps for like typing and all that, right? And you can extend from like, if you know, like if this thing is going to be in your 2D play space, right? If it's going to be an NPC or something, you know, you can extend it from 2D node, and then all of a sudden you get access to a few more different things that a 2D node has. But since this is really just kind of a data container and just kind of does something, we're going to keep it like that. So, all right, so what do we need? Let's just take a look at health again. So max health, right? That's important. So let's go ahead and pull that over. So we'll call this max energy, right? So this is going to be, you know, basically we're going to be getting more and more energy over time. And at a certain time, right, we need to cut that off, right? So if you think about it, like I always kind of think about the realistic, like not realistic, but what would happen in the world. We've got an energy generator and it can only handle so much energy. So the difference here is, since this is going to be constantly ticking up, for health, I kept it an int, but I'm going to call this a float, right? Because there's definitely going to be, you know, in between, right? It's not going to be just 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to have like values in between. So we're going to have max energy. One other thing I can think of right now that we will definitely use is a variable current energy. That's also going to be a float. And we'll just set that to 0 to start with. And then one thing that I'm going to do here that I found was really helpful was actually using a getter and a setter, because, you know, one thing that you think about is when you set the energy, you probably want something else to happen as well, right? And then when you get the energy, you know, I'm having this be sort of a private field, and you can tell it is because it's got the underscore, and then if you give something a decorator of export, you'll actually see it in the editor itself. And if you don't, it'll be hidden, right? So to actually look at that, if we click on energy over here, we can see that, well, nothing is showing up. Oh, it's because we haven't attached the script to it. So that's one thing I guess to note is, you know, I made this node without, like, now if I add it like this and it shows up here, it's going to create the node with the script automatically attached. So
gotcha.
We actually went ahead and made the node before we made the script. So let me go ahead and attach script, and then just go to my scripts and find energy, right? So that's how you attach a script. All right, so now we can see this, and now we see all of a sudden we've got max energy. Cool. And one thing that's kind of cool too is you can do ranges as well, and that'll kind of just give you some helpful things to work with in the editor. And so, for example, if we copy this over here, so export range. So we'll say max energy probably, well, maybe there'll be ships that don't have energy, right? So we'll do 0, and then, I don't know, 200 seems good. And then we can actually set the increment here, right? So maybe 0.5. And now what's going to happen is, over in the editor, you'll see you actually have something you can drag.
That's cool.
Yeah. And the reason I like to do this basically as much as possible, even if I'm kind of sure what I want it to be, is because it kind of gives me an idea when I come back again. If I come back to this in a year, I'm going to say, okay, well, this is kind of nice to know, like, what the values could possibly be. You know, like, it kind of gives me more of a grounded space. Like, because who knows? Like, this could be like maybe 3,000 is a range that makes sense. I don't know. You know, coming back a year later. So I kind of like to do that for myself. And you can always change these, right? But it's kind of like, here's what I'm thinking it's going to be between. And just kind of a way to, like, you know, there's all the debate about, are comments good, are comments bad? So here's a way to like kind of leave a comment to yourself later that isn't a comment. You know? So, okay. So that's the max energy. And what's interesting is this is actually probably not going to get set directly in the editor that much, because what we're going to be doing is, again, making it more modular. We're going to pass the max energy to the energy component itself once the game starts. So that opens things up where one ship maybe has, like I said, it has no energy, right? And it's kind of a weird ship and it doesn't use energy. So one ship might have 100 max energy, a lot, right? And it's gonna just set once the game starts. And we'll kind of run that with data. We probably won't get to that, but okay, here we go.
That's cool.
Who knows what we'll get to. Okay, so again, we have a ready function and a process function. And I would say that the ready function, well, it fires once sort of the game starts and the node is in the tree. So it'll start, it's kind of like on component did mount.
Basically. Yeah, like a life cycle hook.
I don't know if people still use those. I mean, I don't use them, but I learned them. So, and then processes basically will run every frame. Okay, and that's something that is really important in game development and something you don't see much in web development. Right, is that things are happening every single frame in games, right? And you need to know and make changes based on that. Where in web development, it's normally like, okay, I've done an action, something has changed, right? So that's a bit of a difference. And this is something that's important because what we'll want to do is every frame, and that's how games kind of work, is every frame is a different image that people see and something has changed. And so this runs every single frame update, right? And the delta here is a variable that's getting passed in, and I think it's actually a float, so we can go ahead and like label that. But that's basically the amount of time that has passed since the last frame. And it's kind of an approximation a bit because it actually takes the previous two frames, not this one and the one you're on, because it doesn't really know how long the one that you're on is really going to take, right? So a lot of games run at 60 frames per second or higher. Like that's kind of the gold standard, right? So it's generally about 16 milliseconds. And one thing that's different with Godot is it gives you a value that's out of a second, which is actually kind of helpful. So you'll see, let's just look at this. Just to kind of like show you what that looks like, right? And Unity, I believe, uses milliseconds. So Unity would say like the delta is going to be like 16. In this one, it's, as you can see, it's 0.016666. So that's, and again, it's running at 60 frames a second. So
gotcha.
A lot of technical minutia that probably should have waited for later, but
that's cool.
Yeah, so that's kind of what you get by default when you start a new script. You can use them or not. It's just kind of up to you. And so let's kind of look at the health script and see what it's doing. So yeah, we got the max health. And then we've got current health, right? Which is a getter and a setter. Not sure how familiar you are with those. But if we look here, when the ready function starts, and again, that's something that just the node class has. So it's a built-in function. This is interesting. So basically we have a field in here for if it's the current player or not. And we set the current health. So, let's just do that. Just kind of starting to get things one at a time. And so this right here, get parent. Sorry.
No, that's good.
So is player is important because what we're going to be doing, and this is something that's interesting, and like as we get on with the game and the architecture, maybe this will change. But one thing that you'll note, as I mentioned, right, you want it to be that I throw an energy component on an NPC or an enemy, right, and I want it to just work. Well, one thing that we don't want to do is, we have one UI bar, the energy bar, right? We don't want that to update unless it's the current player, right? And so what I'm doing right now is like, I only have one class. I have a class name player. If you look back over here, right? Class name player. So you can check what kind of class a node is. And so that's kind of what I'm doing right now. I'm just saying, hey, if the parent, and this is a built-in Godot function, get parent, we'll just get, the parent node. So, that's kind of a potential, foot gun, right? Because that means that your energy has to be one level deep. So maybe that'll change, and there's a potential for badness later. But so basically, if it's the player, you'll see what we're going to do is we'll actually update the bar anytime it changes. We're going to send a signal to do that.
Cool.
But if it's not, we're just going to basically say, okay, it's updated. We don't need to inform the UI. Okay, so that'll be important in a second. We'll kind of look back at health and say, so this initialize function here seems a bit redundant to ready, but what we're actually going to do is notice it's not underscored. We're going to pass in a float. And this is for that parent component that I mentioned, right? Basically, the parent component is going to be setting this at the very beginning. And a lot of copy and pasting, right? So this is intended to be called from a different component and basically say, all right, I'm going to initialize this and I'm going to give you the max energy that you can have. And in this case, it's actually setting the current energy. I don't think we want to do that because I kind of want to see it tick up, right? So should we just hook that up and see if it...
Yeah, let's hook it up.
Let's hook it up.
If you have the energy.
Nice.
Thanks.
Okay. So let's look at what we have now. And I'm hitting this button up here. It just plays the current scene. So we'll see that this energy is kind of arbitrarily set. And that's just I've given it in this UI bar. And honestly, again, there is a component that is a 9 patch rectangle. And that's basically just something that can stretch and scale. And the way that works is if you take this rectangle, you cut it 2 times and 2 times up and horizontally and vertically, you get 9 patches, right? It's like a tic-tac-toe board. And so what it'll do is it'll keep these corners and it'll basically stretch those middle pieces, right?
Cool.
And so inside that, I just put a rectangle, basically a texture progress bar, which was already built in. It's a component that you can sort of have the max value. You can set the step. So what that means is let's see, is there a current value, right? So it's set to 8. So if we set this to 5, it's going to just kind of automatically fill to halfway, right? Because it's currently 10. One thing is, right, the step is set to 1. So let's just leave it that way and we'll kind of see what that looks like. But let's get it to start and just be set at 0. And that's how we'll know that it's kind of hooked up. So let's open this back up. So max energy again, it's getting set. But let's just go ahead and set it up to the bar, and then we'll kind of go from there. So the way to do that is a signal. And one thing that I have done that is interesting maybe is, are you familiar with singletons? And people are like, don't use them. Well, sometimes you should use them, maybe. And in this case, what I've done is I've created game events. So this is my Godot script called game events.
Mm-hmm.
And basically what it does is it's just a collection of signals. And the reason I've done this is it's called, in Godot, they call it an auto load. And the way you can, well, just Google that if you want to know more. But basically what it does is it will auto load in different nodes before any of the other nodes are loaded. So for example, if we look at this hierarchy, we can see all the stuff in here. You'll notice that game events are not in here, right? Now, if we play the game, over here, we see a remote and a local tab. So local is like what you're working on. Remote is like what actually is happening in this game that is running.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll see here, we have game events has been loaded, and then there's actually like a game, a level, and then playground is finally here. But the thing I want to show is like game events is getting loaded into the hierarchy. So
cool.
And auto loads are accessible anywhere. So it's kind of a singleton, basically. So I've made all these signals, right? And I've already defined them. And so what you can do once you've done that is you can call the game events class, which again, it kind of just knows about since it gets automatically loaded. And then you can call the signal, and then you can call emit.
Mm-hmm.
And signal is basically an event, right? And this is kind of the, publisher subscriber pattern. So I've already kind of, before this started, when I built all this stuff, I was like, I know I'm going to need this. So I put in a max energy changed and energy changed. And the only difference is now we know we're going to use a float for those. And this was just Command D to select the same thing. And what I've done is I've made the event have a previous value and then a new value. And that's just like, I don't really use the previous value at the moment, but it's kind of like, well, maybe you can see a case in which you've seen some games where if you take damage, right, like the bar doesn't just jump, it'll like maybe darken to where it's going to go, and then it'll kind of like scroll down, right? And so maybe if you were doing something like that, you'd want the old value and the new value. So I'm kind of like coding for the future here, which
we do.
Okay, so that was a lot of talking for not a lot of doing. So let's do. Okay, so what we want to do is we're going to say game events. Well, first we want to say if is player, right? Because we only want to update this if it's a player. We'll do game events dot, and this should give us all the possible events. Player energy changed, some nice autocomplete, dot emit, and then we'll do current energy. So if my theory is correct, every frame it's going to emit the current energy, which should be, this is actually going to set it to full, but let's not do that. Let's set it to 0 so we can see it tick up. Oh no.
And then how do you connect that to start listening to that signal?
Good question. See, one thing I did wrong was I just put the previous and not both. So one thing is, I guess, it doesn't really do the autocomplete, and it doesn't really tell you if you're messing that up.
Yeah.
So that could be probably improved, but I'll show you how to connect that, but let's just make sure it's actually going to the right place first. So yeah, you can see it's just 0 now, right? There's nothing there.
Cool.
So it is connected. Get rid of this print statement. Okay, so to show it connected, what we're going to do is look at actually the UI component itself. And I've written a script. I've already attached it, so I guess I cheated maybe. But so I've made an energy bar, and all you do to connect it is, again, we're using this ready function. I've done game events dot player energy changed, and you connect it to a function within the script, and that's really all you do. You just hit .connect, and so anytime it's emitted, this is going to get that. This is going to run this function.
Cool. Very reactive. There was, in the web development world, the creator of Preact made a library called Signals that is reactive just like this, and you can emit a change to a signal, and anybody else who's listening to that signal will immediately get the change. Really nice. It like abstracts away a whole lot of like passing state around. So
Yeah.
This is really cool.
Yeah, and so the way that I've set it up again is kind of like, this is kind of a global way, and so you probably wouldn't want to do most of your things this way. Like, most of it is designed for, like, we can look back in the player script, and I'm sure there'll be some examples, but most of it is kind of designed for nodes to communicate, generally speaking, back up to, you know, the parent node, right? Basically saying, like, if we look at the health event, or the health, not that script, but the health component, and you can see there's a little signal icon, right? And it's funny because, like, in Godot, I was learning all about these signals and how they do it. And then, like, all the signal Preact stuff kind of blew up. And I was like, oh, I wonder if they, you know, maybe he opened up Godot and was like, whoa, this is cool.
Yeah.
But it was probably just, yeah.
I do think they all learn from each other. And I'd say I also recognize some things, like if you use Svelte, the way that export var health, max health at the top looks is very similar to how you expose a prop in Svelte at the very top. So yeah, they're all just borrowing from each other, I think.
Yeah, which is really good. I mean, you should, right? Take the best stuff and leave the rest.
Yeah.
So yeah, if we look at this health component, right, and we won't need this in the energy one, but here's a signal, and this is how you just define it, right? You just define it as signal, and then the name, and then if there's arguments, you put them in here, right? Like I don't know why you would want that, but right. So yeah, that's kind of how you define it. And then this signal, I've got it set up where if the player has died, so if the current health is less than 0, then call on death, which, like, the reason it's set up this way, it doesn't just directly call the signal, is because I'm thinking, like, in the future, I'll probably want to, like, maybe spawn a particle effect or something like that, right? But do all the stuff that you should do when you die, and then emit the signal. And then if we look back in player, we'll see that, well, actually, what I'm guessing is I have connected this signal, and you can see on the right here in the inspector area, when you click on the node, it'll show you all the signals that it has, right? And so we'll see here that this is actually connected to a bunch of other things directly. And what's kind of cool is you can connect this to, like, anything in the hierarchy over on the left. And so, like, I don't know, let's just say for a reason I want to connect this asteroid needs to know that that the player died, which is not something you'd ever need, but say it did, and then here are all the script, all the functions on that. It has like an entity script on it that just basically says I'm a thing in the world, and you can run into me. But it's like, here are all the functions that match the signature, which is nothing, right? So I could call any one of these things on that asteroid, right, if I wanted to, and just hook it up through the UI.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool, but you can also hook things up through code, which is what we're doing in the game events, right? Because, you know, basically they're not going to be in the hierarchy until the game fully loads. So, so anyway, yeah, it uses signals, right? So basically what we've done in the energy field is we've said, okay, once we get connect this signal to this function, so anytime the player energy changed, we're going to run this function. And again, it matches, right? Previous energy, new energy. And again, we don't use previous energy. We just say, okay, well, self.value, which again is on can see value here, right? It's going to just directly set that, right? And self is kind of like how you reference basically this class. So this texture bar, again, is built in Godot. You can take a peek at what it has, just click into it, and it's got, that value, right? So it's pretty cool.
Cool.
Yeah, so that's how it's connected, right? So what I think we should do is maybe just have it filling up and then maybe call it, because it's a long video.
Yeah, let's see it. Let's see it. I'd love to see it move and fill up, and
yeah,
cool.
Yeah, because I know we've gone, I think, a little bit longer, but let's at least get that happening. So again, what we're going to do is every frame we want to go up. So we're going to do, again, we're going to export something. Export, I guess we'll do a range. So we'll do, again, 0 to, and we're going to do it per second, right? So like, think about it like this. Like, let's say we generate 1 energy a second, right? So I don't know, probably 10 energy a second would be a lot. So we'll say that's the upper bound. And we'll just do that in a 0.5 increment again, var. And then we'll do energy recharge rate. And we'll say it's just, by default, it's just 1, right? So and let me test something. This is the rate of recharge per second. Okay. And this is supposed to work. Again, with Godot, it's funny, right? Like some things work, some things used to work and don't work anymore. Okay, cool. So now, like, you can see I kind of have a little...
Oh, the comment. Yeah, it becomes like a little tooltip helper.
Yep. Which is super cool.
Yeah.
And that's just by doing 2 of these, right?
Okay.
Instead of just 1. 1 is kind of just a comment, but if you do 2, it'll like be a tooltip. So that's pretty interesting. And you'll see too that max energy, it's all uppercase. That's kind of the convention for GD script of like a constant, even though like it gets set when the thing starts. So is it really a constant? Maybe not, but it also, like, once it's set, it probably won't ever change, right? So it's like one of those kind of like, is it a constant? Is it not? But like this again also should probably not change once it's set, but let's just leave it like this. Like I can imagine where you get hit by an effect and your recharge rate is halved, so maybe it changes, or you probably still just modify it, but okay. Blah, 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 lots of talking. Okay, so, and we know we looked at the print statement, the delta was out of a second, which is super helpful because now we know that what we'll do is we'll say current energy every second. And again, you probably would want a flag that's like, is recharging, right? Because again, I can see an effect where, oh, you get EMP blasted. So now you're not going to recharge, right? So you might want to check if it's, if it's rechargeable. But we're going to say plus equal recharge rate, energy times delta. And I think this will be like, order of operations. You probably don't need the parentheses, but we'll just be sure. And so this is something that I think is, if you have experience with game development, it's something that you would not blink an eye at. If you're coming from the web world, you're going to be like, well, what is delta, right? And again, the delta is that change in time since the last frame. And the reason that we do that is, like, if we didn't do that, this energy recharge rate would go to, it would run every tick. Tick is also like frames per second, what people call it. So it would go super fast. I mean, we can just look at that right now, right? I mean, I don't even know if you would see, I think it would just be full basically. So let's look at it. See, it's just full before you even see it.
Yeah.
And that's because it's doing it every frame. So if we multiply it by that, it's basically going to say, it's going to smooth it out. It's going to say, limit it basically by the frame rate, right? And since it's frames per second and it's a second-based frame rate, it'll be it'll recharge the percent of it will be recharged by 1 based on the frame.
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
like as much as 1 second has gone by in the frame.
Yeah.
So now if we look at it, see,
It's
see how
going up.
now
Yeah.
it's ticking, and that's kind of weird, right?
No, it's cool.
It
That's
is
awesome.
cool. But the reason it's ticking is another thing I'll show you. Is again, you know, we copy and paste here in the development world. So I copied and pasted from health. And the step on my health bar, since I was using an integer, was 1, because it could only ever change by 1. But if we change this to like 0.1, you'll see that it's actually going to go much smoother, right?
Oh, yes. That's awesome.
Yes. So there you go. But now, yeah, so but there are a few problems already, but
yeah.
One of them being that you don't see this, but because we didn't like clamp the value, I think it's just continuing to add energy. And since the bar itself only goes to 10 as the max value, the actual value is probably way higher. And so like if you started to use something, the bar wouldn't go down until you used enough energy, right? We didn't cap it. So let's just look at what it is.
So this, you can kind of see the current state of the data of the game here.
Yes, I think so. You get a lot more information than, oh, maybe it did. Oh, well, yes. So this value is actually just going to be 10 because it's going to clamp it itself. But if we look at energy,
Like
which
the
we
signal?
we haven't exposed it, remember? So we might not see. Oh, but it does show. See, like,
cool.
Look.
Yeah.
So you can see we've gone way past the max.
Yeah, yeah. So how do you clamp things?
So Godot has a lot of, and GD script is really cool because it was kind of designed to be used for games. So it has a lot of really handy functions built in. And you know, I say that and you're going to say, oh, wow, like a clamp function. But yeah, basically what we'll do is we'll clamp it. And that's another thing that I kind of wanted to bring up why I used a getter and setter in health is that I want to make sure that the value is basically kind of cleaned before I even apply it, right? We didn't set that up in this. Because I figured it might just take a little too much time. Oh, yeah. So what we'll do is then we'll say, I wouldn't generally make this many variables, but I'm going to do it for just sake of readability for now.
Yeah.
But so the value is going to be new energy. And then it said minimum is going to be, we don't want to go below 0. And then the maximum will be max energy.
Nice.
And so that way, new energy clamped. And then we want to make sure that we use that. And actually what's kind of nice is, so the previous energy will just be current energy, right? In case, again, we did want to use that, and then we'll go ahead and after that, we will set the current energy equals to energy clamped. There you go. So that should fix that. You can double check.
It's going up, going up.
Up, go to remote. And yeah, like I'll say, I find that kind of troubleshooting this stuff in Godot, or not troubleshooting, but like taking a look at this stuff, is a little bit more. I feel like Unity is a little better with that, right? Because it just kind of like this screen is like embedded, and it just like instead of having a remote and local, it just kind of updates to what the remote is. So I think it's a little bit more usable for Unity doing this kind of thing, but I've kind of made do. But yeah, we can see here that we're getting current energy is 10 and it's not going past that.
Cool. That's very cool. So what would be the next few things that you would do? Like what are you going to do after, because you want that energy to decrease when you boost.
Right.
So just like, where are you going to do that? You don't have to do it now, but.
Sure. So that's actually, that gets to, yes. So basically what we would do is, what's interesting is I created a booster component and it's on the ship right here. And so this is actually the thing that's listening for the key press, and it's executing the boost itself. And so what we would want to do, and this is a bit weird, and I can't decide if I like this, but when this booster is initialized, we pass in its parent, right? And that's kind of what we call as the boost target, which might be confusing, but we pass in its parent, and then we basically act on that parent. So again, it's a bit like, I'm not sure I necessarily love how I've set it up, but it is how it is. So what I would do is basically, I mean, it's interesting, right? Like, I would probably add, I mean, there's two things you could do, right? You could actually add directly in an energy component, right? And cache that as well here, and then do the checks on that energy component. Or you could do things like, well, I guess you actually would have the reference to its energy component on the player, because that's one thing that we didn't do, is we actually never connected the energy component to the player. So I'm going to do that.
Yeah,
so we
let's do it.
have a reference to that. So again, we're copying and pasting energy component, and we're going to call it energy. And it knows that class name from our definition here. And so what that is going to do is it's going to show us in here in the inspector, we'll have a new field here that's, the energy component, and we can just drag that right in, and it'll automatically like know that we're talking about that script. And so given that, what we could do is say, on the booster, instead of, again, this was using time, right? So let's go ahead. I think we could do this pretty quick. Do you have?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So export var boost energy cost. So this will be a float, right? And again, we've already done some. We want to do the range, right? So, in theory, probably be 1. Maybe the maximum cost for a boost would be 20. I don't know. Maybe that's like a crazy booster. And then the increment just kind of keep 0.5, right?
I'm sorry. Is this costing energy points or like money or what?
Yeah. So boost. So it's the energy cost, right? So it's how much energy you would need to use to be able to boost. Right?
I see. Okay,
so,
cool.
Like we have the max energy of the ship is 10, right, at the moment, and it goes up to 10 and then it stops. So like, it would be like, I need 5 of that before I can boost, right?
Cool.
And you could play with this, right? And that's kind of like the job of the game designer, right? He's going to say, and the idea too for this is like, it would be cool to have different boosters, right? Say you have a booster that's like it goes really fast, but you can only use it if your engine's big enough, right? So you could say, oh, this one needs to have needs to take 11, right? So you have to have a ship that has a max energy that's even able to use it, right? So let's just say 5. So we could use it twice. And so what I'll do is we can say, so right here, I have like a termination statement, some short circuiting. And this is running in the physics process, which is tied to basically 60 frames consistently. And I probably should be just using the regular process for this, but it is what it is for now. That's its own video. Okay, so what we'll do is, so every frame, basically, we want to check if we can even boost. So we'll do boost target dot energy component. Let's see if you can even do this. So it is a player. Boost target is physics body. Oh. Now, does it extend from there? That's the question. Player extends rigid body 2D.
Yeah, and so you're kind of wondering why that didn't autocomplete for you when you were typing energy component?
Yeah, so the reason is because this boost target, and again, this is where things can, like I can already see, like I'm going to have to make some changes, right? Because this is looking for a player. And again, if we wanted to put this on a NPC, it would need to be basically something that isn't the player. So like kind of a lower level. But for now, just to make this work, say it's the player. And so that's why it wasn't auto-completing, because basically this variable was sort of what, a base class of this.
Yeah.
There's even a physics body 2D, which is even lower, right? And so it basically, the cool thing about that, right, is that, you can pass it a bunch of different things, right? Like probably even one of my asteroids, I could put a booster on it. And it would just maybe work. But anyway, let's just continue with this to see it working. And then, and again, this is like, I'm accessing a private field here, which I would probably have a getter and setter that would just return the field. But let's just do it for the sake of seeing it work. So if is less than the energy cost, we will also return. So basically what we're saying is, if we don't have the energy here, like don't even do the rest of it.
Don't even bother.
Yeah, don't even
continuing. Don't even, just
get out of here.
If you don't have the energy to work today, just return to your house.
Get out of here. And so what I'm going to do is, again, it used to be time-based, right? But now it's not going to be time-based. It's going to be energy-based. So we'll just say, we'll get rid of this. And so I had some variables that were tracking like the last time it was boosted and the current time, right? So that we could say, hey, let's go ahead and not allow it to do it unless it's been a certain time. And so we'll say, okay, we can do it. Did they press the button? Yes, they pressed the button. If they've pressed the button, it says boosting, do the stuff. So this is where I'm going to remove the energy. So
could I just ask you something real fast? It's like, this is checking on 60 times a second to see if the user has pressed the button.
Yes.
In that tick.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha.
Yes,
so that's interesting. Like, I would have thought just every time a user presses a button, you're able to like react to that instead of having to put something where you're just like checking, hey, did they press it this? Did they press it? Did they press it?
Yeah. And there may even be a way to do that. But like, for example, Unity was actually very similar to this. And they've recently done a new input package that is more event-based, right? So it's basically like when this happens, kind of send out a message again, right? Instead of checking every frame.
Interesting. Yeah.
But that's kind of the thing, right? One of my problems with Unity is they always upgrade stuff, which is great. But what they don't do a great job of is like, what the thing is, then they'll keep the old stuff in there, right? And so, it makes sense, but it's also like, if you watch the tutorial now, there's two different ways to do it, right? And it's kind of like
classic. I mean, gosh, we have experienced that every 6 months in the JavaScript community. So
right.
yeah, we're used to that.
Yeah. So, but it's like with Unity, they've just kind of, it just feels like they have so much of that going on. Like they have this new way to do UI, but there's just not much documentation. And it's like, well, we made it for the editor, but you can use it in real time, which means like in the game.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really hard to find the info on how to do it. And it's kind of like, so you're constantly like with Unity, I feel like you're constantly in this phase where you're like, well, should I use the new system or should I use the old one that has all the documentation and the videos? Am I going to just have to update it? Like, I don't know. It makes you, I don't know.
Yeah.
In Godot, I feel like they've done a good job at being like, this is how it works. This is how you should do it in Godot.
Yeah.
And there's like always in game development and web, there's always like 100 ways to do something, but it's like, here's how you should just probably do it. And this is the one way to do it. And it feels a little bit more, and maybe it's just kind of, again, it's an old project, but maybe it's just kind of like younger in that sense.
Yeah.
Okay, let's just see if this works. Again, I already know there's going to be a problem with this, but let's just see if we can kind of get that nice. So I'm trying to boost, but I can't, right? Because I haven't had halfway. Now
you boosted, but it didn't take away your you're constantly boosting, right?
Yes.
Now you're busted. You boosted until you're busted. Yeah.
So I'm not exactly sure why.
Well, this might be a little interesting to talk through this. I'll tell you from a non-Godot, non-GD script user viewpoint. Like, so you set the current energy and you subtracted the cost of the boost target there when you boosted. And you expected the bar to go down by 5, right?
Right. Yes.
It didn't go down.
No.
Can you can just change variables directly on, like, you can just change that current energy variable. You did mention that you didn't have a setter and a getter.
Yeah.
Is there something that has to happen that you would have put in the setter that didn't happen?
So I guess I'm wondering if like there could be sort of like an order of operation things happening here as well. But what I would have expected was for it to go down, but potential problems with like basically undershooting, right? Meaning like since we don't have like the clamping happening. But the thing that I'm also wondering is like maybe it does subtract this, but in the booster or in the energy script itself that executes after or something, or maybe there's an order of operations thing happening.
Oh, so maybe you're saying like kind of like yeah, it's subtracting, but then it's already replacing it with the previous current one. You know how it replaces it with the previous current one? It's like,
yes, exactly.
It's like a stale, in JavaScript you might call it like a closure, where
Yep.
like it has the previous variable still.
Right. So like right here, right? That's where it could be even happening, because as I mentioned, that thing is happening in a different, it's happening in the physics update rather than just the regular update. So it's kind of like if this gets set after that,
Yeah. Yeah.
that could be the issue. But the other thing too is like yeah, so that's certainly, I mean, we can kind of test that and just see, like, let's just put this in the process function. And then
Oh, I
I
see. So
also,
you're thinking maybe those are even two different scopes or something?
yeah.
Okay,
Well, they run at different rates, right? Like the physics engine sort of, this
okay.
isn't even updating at all, but I'm wondering if it's because, so one thing that I did with the health bar that like maybe it's time to do is, because what I've done, let's just pull this stuff, current energy. And the other thing I'm thinking too is it could be as simple as sorry.
Well, you go ahead and type this out, and I'll talk a little bit about some things I'm thinking, but don't
Sure.
let this get in your way. I could see, in the traditional, you create a bank class, you would normally not allow a user of that class to just set the balance of the bank account. You might allow them to remove some or add some to the bank balance, but not set it themselves. And like, I could see how you might want to do the same thing here, where yes, you can take away energy, you can add energy, but the energy, the actual balance of energy is a private. Is that something that you think would matter, or doesn't really matter?
Well, you definitely want to like have certain access levels, right? I think what's happening here is if you look at the set health,
Yeah.
we're making sure every time we clamp it, right? Again, because we don't want to go under or over. But what we're doing too is we're emitting this health changed, right? In when we set it. And what I'm thinking is that in this, we just kind of ham-fistedly sort of put this right in this process. So every frame it's getting sent, which it's probably going to do. But the thing is, if we set it, we can make sure that this event gets fired at that point if we put it here. So let's just do let's do that here, and let's call let's just see if that we can get rid of that, right? And so the setter again, yeah, it'll call this function which updates it every time it's set, which is kind of what you want anyway, right? Like if it changes, you want to send that event to the UI.
And on line 29, do you want the underscore before current energy?
No, because this is the like
Oh, this is our one. Okay, cool.
Get set get needs to set get. Okay, let's see. Is everyone happy here? Set current. just see if that fixes it. No, it's still not fixing it. Oh my.
And so in web world, we might add a bunch of console logs inside of these functions to see when they're getting called and what the values are. But is that something you would do here, or do you typically just try to go look at the values as they change in those right sidebar?
I think I would do consoles just like we do.
Cool.
Just like we do. Well, let's go ahead and okay. So we haven't updated this, so use energy, and then we want to just give it the cost. Let's see, maybe because this wasn't hooked up. And again, like I don't really love this sort of scenario, right? So I might, if I were to kind of spend a little bit more time, I might sort of put some of these functions on the player itself, where you know it might say, well, can I boost? Right? And it would be telling you that based on this. And then it would say, okay, you know, go ahead and boost. And then that would sort of call into what it needs to update, which would be, you know, that use energy function. Let's see, does it work? Oh, no.
Almost. I feel like it's almost there.
Yeah.
So I would just be so curious if you put a print statement inside of use energy, like, is that even getting called?
Like that.
Like that.
Okay, and then that's going to show up down here. Oh yeah, so it gets called a lot actually. Which is interesting.
Interesting. So it's boosting a bunch of times, and maybe even until the boost finishes or something.
Well, I think part of it is like, you know, again, it's like, is action
is boost pressed? Yeah.
So I wonder if that, so just pressed, I think maybe is like, because again, this is every frame, right? So like if I hit tab and I hold it, or if it lasts a few frames, which it might, right? Like if it is down for more than 16 milliseconds, you know, it's gonna, okay. So that,
there we go.
That's more what we want there. But the thing is, it's just not updating the energy. And I wonder, let's just, let's take another look and let's look at the values this time. So player, and we'll look at energy. And we see it there, right? So if we, it's just, I don't think it's going to go down. Yeah, so it's not going,
it's not
current
going
energy
down.
is not going down, though that's getting called.
And I do see two current energies there.
Yeah, so one of them's that private one, and then one of them is the
okay.
So like you can't even see them normally, right?
Yeah.
But once it's running, I guess, which is kind of nice, right? Because you do want to sort of see everything. So current energy minus equals the amount that you're using. So it should be, so I'm wondering like, oh, that's why. It's because, wait, new energy, right? Current energy, but it doesn't actually set this one, right? Maybe that's the problem. You ever think about that?
You know,
probably need to actually set the value that's running. But before we get too cocky, let's make sure it works.
See. Oh, yeah.
It works.
All right.
That's how you know you're a doofus.
No, no. I feel like this is very much everyday programming.
Yeah, so there you go,
You're
man. We got
pressing it. And there you go. You got your boost.
you got your boost based on the energy. And again, like already, like, you know, what this opens up is like an upgrade. So you say your ship now has 20 max energy, right? So you can boost way more in a small period of time, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, so it just kind of makes things a little bit more dynamic, more pathways for like upgrading your ship, just with a change like that.
Yeah,
And the energy system again can start to interact with other things too, right? Where say you opt to take an energy shield, like I mentioned, and now it's like, well, I've got this energy shield, which is great, but now I can't boost as much, right?
Yep. Well, this is very cool. It was really cool to see how you debug building a game. Like, honestly, this is totally unfamiliar to me, but at the same time, it also shows you how if you become familiar with programming, like I am with the web development, it's not like I'm completely out of my depth here. Like I'm able to kind of see what's going on, able to help a little bit, and maybe other people watching will be like, hey, maybe I can make a game, even though I've never done it before, you know?
Well, I would say you can. Definitely.
Yeah.
There's lots of tools out there. It's definitely, and I would even say, you know, try it. Just because it's a different paradigm, right? It's programming, but it's like you just think differently, right? Again, you have to think about like what's happening every frame, physics, you know, it's just a whole bunch of, it's interesting, right? And even if you kind of, and I would say start very small too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, this is even a small project. I've been working on it obviously off and on, like very often, mostly off, but for like 6 years. And,
yeah. 6 years. Well, I feel like, you know, if you're watching this and you want to see more of these types of sessions with Duncan working on this exact game, you know, we might do another one. Let me know if you want to see that. But also you can follow Duncan. You're going to be posting some stuff, right? So here's your Twitter at Wildforge_games. But if Twitter's not around in a year, here's your Mastodon. So Wildforge at mastodongamedev.place.
And I guess I need to make a threads now?
You might have to make it threads.
Lordy.
And then eventually, will they be able to find you on Twitch or YouTube? Will it be Wildforge?
Yeah, so it's going to be, Wildforge Games as well. I think it's at Wildforge Games. It'll be on YouTube. I don't really plan on live streaming ever, just because I like more of the sort of edited. I don't know that I'd be able to. I think it would be better if I was able to edit myself.
You did pretty good today, so maybe one day. But Duncan, I really appreciate you coming on here and doing this. It takes a lot of courage to code in front of people and kind of reveal that we're all kind of making it up and breaking things and figuring out as we go. But I think it's really helpful to show people that. So really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me, and carry on.
All right. Until next time. Thanks, Duncan.
Bye.